Right, so originally I didn't need to record a video on chapter 8, but due to the vast number of requests that I've had, and I'm actually completely blown away by the number of people who are watching the videos and have asked for this chapter, so I thought I must definitely make an analysis of chapter 8. So here we go. You'll remember in the last chapter it was all about the confrontation between Tsotsi and Morris Shabalala, and how Tsotsi realized that he didn't have to kill him. And the fact that this man who has such a terrible lifestyle still has a desire to live. And Tsotsi realizes that killing is a choice and he decides not to kill him. And this is the first kind of mention of Tsotsi giving up his violent ways for somebody else and showing any form of emotion. And he decides that he actually wants to figure out more about who he is and his past. So this is really the turning point and the start of the transformation for Tsotsi as a character, because he's now spared a man's life when he had the chance to kill him. And that's the first kind of thing that we hear of him doing that at this point. If you think about Gumboot, for example, and the way he beat up Boston. Chapter 8 starts randomly with Church of Christ the Redeemer, which is just the local church in the township there. On the next page, we see it's Reverend H. Ransom's church. He is the pastor or the priest. The whole purpose of the page really is just talking about how the bells of the church ring and how it's all sorts of people that are hearing it. Right here, it's heard in the rooms of the township. Most people are still asleep because it's been a long night, Friday, Saturday night. You know, the shebeens are full, some are 3 sheets to the wind. So Sunday is the lazy day before it's back to work. And even Boston hears these church bells, and he's lying still somewhere half unconscious and feeling very sorry for himself. Doesn't know where he is, but he's afraid of shame because he's been lying there for some time now, beaten up. His pants have been stolen, and of course he's in a lot of pain. Then we get to Reverend H. Ransom, who, despite being the pastor, his faith is not very strong, we seem to think. He looks out at the people that are coming into the church, and he finds himself angry with their best-suited, unsmiling, stiff devotions. He feels like he wants to tell them to go home. Go home, it's no good. I didn't know his name. So I didn't know his name tends to indicate that the person that he buried or is going to bury, he doesn't even know what his name is. So how can he, have this funeral? He doesn't even know the person that he's burying. But at the same time, he's also saying, what's the point coming to church and that it doesn't change anything. So he's pretty weak in his faith there. But of course he can't do that because he's the dedicated minister, priest. So he has to just pretend that he's holy and he believes, etc., and that his faith is strong. But all he actually says is, God help me, because there's no how he's going to do this. Then it comes to Tsotsi again. And so we leave now Christ the Redeemer church alone. We come back to Tsotsi. He came through the doorway, stepping lightly among the fallen bricks. So now this is the ruins, okay? So we've jumped to the ruins where he left the baby with the condensed milk. And he sees these lines on the wall, and it's a line that's running down to the shoebox where the baby is, then over the shoebox and into the corner beyond. That line is a line of ants, okay? The ants have obviously found the condensed milk and have started devouring it. It gives us a little idea here because Tsotsi is like kind of deep in thought. He's not actually realizing that there are ants going into the box yet. He has this memory where he had a pencil that Boston had left on a table, and he remembers how he had toyed with it for a few seconds, scribbling on a few lines on the tabletop, playing with it, and then he looked up and saw something in Boston's eyes that had made him angry, and then he deliberately broke the pencil. So a scribble is illegible. It's not anything. It doesn't mean anything because he can't write, you see. He can't read and he can't write. So if you can't write, what must you do with a pencil? So you just like scribble something, okay? And he was kind of having fun, like toying with it in his hands. And then he looked at Boston and then he realized Boston could read and write, okay, and that made him angry. It made Tsotsi angry because he didn't have that education that Boston had. And so subconsciously he's bitter about that. And so then he decides he's going to break the pencil. That's typically going back to his violent ways. Things that he knows, violence. Okay. Alright, we're moving on. Then he realizes, oh damn, those are ants. Okay. It was the condensed milk, of course. And then Tsotsi turned the shoebox last of all after he had tried to get rid of all the ants, beating them, pinching them between his fingers and that. He was almost too frightened to lift the lid because he's scared now. These ants that are going into the box, what is he going to find there? Is the baby going to be dead? The baby lay quiet and he thinks that maybe it's dead, but he sees a couple of bubbles burst from its mouth. He realizes that, well, it's probably almost dead, but it's still alive. Tsotsi knew it was a crisis. He fought down a sudden desire to throw the lot, baby, condensed milk, and spoon deep into the ruins and never come back again. So that would be the easy way out. And it's something that the Tsotsi that we are introduced to at the start of the novel would have probably done. We don't know. But he decides not to do that because he's come this far already. Instead, he took a deep breath, held it, and went to work, which is quite mature. That shows him taking responsibility and the fact that he actually cares for this baby as well. It took him a few minutes to kill all the ants, pinching them between his thumb and his forefinger. Okay, and he tries to make sure that he gets rid of all the ants, trying to get them out the condensed milk, but he realizes that it's too late for the condensed milk. Luckily, there aren't too many ants in the box yet, so it hadn't been too long that these ants had arrived, so luckily he got there in time. It says here that killing the ants had restored some of his confidence, but the urgency of the situation remained. Okay, so it's like when he used his jacket when he first got the baby into in his room, and he felt proud of that. There's a similar situation. He's now achieved something, and that's killing the ants. Tsotsi had dwelt too long in death not to feel its imminent presence in the shoebox. So Tsotsi has surrounded himself with death so much, and by killing people, etc., that he knows when death is around the corner, and he feels like this baby is about to die soon. The baby needed a lot, and he needed it quickly. Food, he thought. It must have food. The condensed milk was useless. Remember, the condensed milk is what he got from the shop, the Indian shopkeeper, and he realizes that, well, there's no point going to Kasim again because Kasim didn't know what he was talking about, and, well, certainly the condensed milk didn't work. Okay. He remembered the cripple, that's Morris. Last night he thought, it is past, this is today, another strange day. He left the wall and broke the momentum of thoughts that threatened to carry him away from the present. So, yes, those thoughts that he has about going back to his childhood and this change that is happening and about how he can make choices in life and stuff, he can't allow himself to delve too deep into that at the moment because he needs to focus on helping the baby. Then we have a little touching moment here where Tsotsi put out a finger and touched the small pink palm of the baby, and the baby wraps his fingers around his finger and stuff like that. He was feeling for the baby. He remembered the cripple again. So it's strange how when he has this connection with the baby, he also remembers the cripple. And I've written here, the cripple, like the baby, brings out his gentleness. Page 95. Let's go through all that. Tsotsi wrapped up the baby in his coat and left the ruin. Okay, he leaves the condensed milk behind. So he's done his best to try and get the baby sorted out, but he's also left the shoebox behind because it's all soggy because the baby has messed in its homemade diaper, as it were, and seeped through. So that's also useless. So now this poor baby is sitting there, lying there in its own mess, and it's hungry. Now I've put here, why does he wrap the baby in his coat? Is it to hide the baby, or is it to keep the baby warm? I'm sure there's no doubt that it's to hide the baby because, they're going whole, that image of gangster, he doesn't want anybody to see that he has a baby. But it's quite convenient, though, that he wraps this baby in his coat because it adds to the fact that he's changing, that he cares for the baby. Then this little break here takes us away a little bit to somewhere else. At the bottom of the street, not far from Tsotsi's room, blah, 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 is the communal tap. Okay, so there's only one tap in the whole area. All right, and that just goes with the terrible living conditions that non-whites had to experience in the township there during apartheid. Okay, remember this is like during the 1950s. So there's only one tap, and it's at this tap, which they called Waterworks Square, that a lot of people came and would have conversations about like their whole lives, and then you'd never see the person again. Okay, because you had to stand in this queue for a long time, sometimes like an entire day. Okay, the residents came to it starting early in the morning and then all through the day, still there when the sun set. And then it says here, yet all it gave was water. They came to it with buckets and basins and babies on their backs, so all sorts of people, young, old, etc. And then emphasis again, all it gave was water. So something so simple as a piece of wood with a tap on it and a pipe can attract the entire population of the township. All sorts of people, doesn't matter who you are, but yet all it gave was water. So water, something that you and I take for granted, is something actually now that is so precious to the people. All right. So again, emphasizing the terrible living conditions of the time period and of the location. And because these residents had to wait so long for it, at noon the queue would stretch back past Tsotsi's room, because they're stranger met stranger in a common purpose, a common thirst. Like I say, everybody has to drink, okay? And you could talk there waiting in the queue about nothing or everything and never meet again. That stocky length of wood and gurgling pipe was rooted in their lives. It was an integral part of their lives. The children, as soon as they could walk and carry, were sent into its servitude. So as soon as a child could basically walk, he was sent to the tap to go and fetch water, amongst other things. Talks about talk at the tap here, an idiom. In other words, when you met in this long queue of people, sometimes you knew them, sometimes you didn't, but the fact is you would gossip a little bit about what's happening in the township. There was also the story that they tell us of old Jenkins Molopopo, who had stood in his turn through a hot day empty-handed, just so that he could have his last drink directly from the tap and then die. Okay. And then talks about the expression a baby is born between drops. In other words, a baby is born so quickly. It even goes to say that once a baby had been born right next to this tap, and then the mother, just after giving birth, hadn't left yet because her paraffin tin was not full. So that's how important the water was. Where else is she going to go? She has to get her water. Among those who took their turn in the queue that Sunday afternoon was Miriam Ngidi. Now, it's important, she's an important character. Miriam Ngidi, who's 18 years old, and she has a baby tied to her back. Okay, that was one of the things you learned in the township without ever actually being taught, how to measure the time of a queue by its length. It wasn't as simple as it sounded. Okay, it's just going on about how when you stand in a queue, the same queue for the same tap so many times, you get to know how quickly a queue moves. So wherever you are in the queue, you'll be able to figure out roughly how long you'll be standing there. It flowed weakest, this water, when it was needed most in the early morning, then again at noon, and then at supper time. And Miriam Ngidi's baby was awake, but he's very well behaved because he's obviously done this so many times. He's 6 months old. She saw a portent of great manhood. She was proud of him. A bolt of pride, her son, hers, Miriam Ngidi's baby, the man they would call Simon. So she's decided that he's going to be called Simon after his father, and the father is nowhere to be seen. He went to work one day and never returned. The thought of her baby drifted out of her mind, and somewhere else she heard that small voice that was hers and was never silent and always asked the same question: Simon, where are you? So Simon was her husband, went to work one day, never returned. She had searched. 8 months had gone by after he disappeared. She had walked the 6 miles to the factory along the same road where he used to walk, and this was during the time of the bus boycott, so that's why they were walking, but there was no sign of him, no word, no memory, nothing. Okay, she's still standing in the queue. This is the setting that we are now, and there's an old man in the queue, and he says they do jump in front. One day I never moved at all. They did it so cleverly. It is the young ones. So the children jump in the queue, which make you obviously stay there longer. And her and the old man start talking a little bit, and she explains to the old man that her husband went to work, didn't come back, and there were a few that didn't come back at first, but then they did come back eventually, and the reason for that was they were arrested, put in jail for a little bit, but the jails are so full and they haven't done anything wrong, so then they released them. Okay, but unfortunately Simon is one who never returned, and we don't know what happened to him. Was he robbed like Gumboot and killed? Was he in a mining accident like Morris? Was he shot by police? Police brutality, for doing nothing wrong, kind of thing, and which goes quite nicely with the bus boycott. So it is possible. We don't know, and we're never told. When it came to her turn at the tap, she turned around and asked him for his turn and filled that first. Okay, that was nice of her. Respect for the elderly. Miriam was now earning a living for herself and the child as a wash girl. Okay, right to page 100. She's obviously upset about it. She gets a little lump in her throat when she's telling the old man about her husband not coming home and that, but she carries on. You had to. That's just life. Tomorrow is no respect of today's tragedy and comes along and makes it the past. The thing that happened and it's over and in a way done with, and gives you another day to get through. So time waits for nobody. No matter what kind of day you've had, the sun will set and it will rise again, and it becomes the past very quickly, and you just have to move on. There's no two ways about it. So then she goes home. She gets into her house. She puts the baby down on the bed, and then there's a knock on her door. And she almost got excited, but then she realized, wait, that can't be Simon. He would never have knocked. He would have just come in. And she opens the door and she sees this man standing there, which we know is Tsotsi. Okay, that's Tsotsi. She doesn't know who he is, obviously. She says, "What do you want?" And he shrugged his shoulders. And then he looked back behind himself to make sure that no one was around. Now that's quite suspicious. When Miriam sees him do that, she realizes, oh, damn it. Wait, this is bad. So she tries to slam the door, but he puts his foot in the way, and she's not successful. And he says to her, if you try and run away or scream, I'll kill your child, because he sees her baby sitting there. Now that's so typical of Tsotsi. He doesn't know how to kind of ask in a nice way or have any form of logic. He just goes straight to violence because that's what he knows. And he knows that violence gets results. Okay, so even though he's changing slowly, we can't expect him to change completely. He's still relying on his instincts, as it were, and that's to go to violence. He asks him to come out the house. All right? We don't know at this point really what he wants, but she's hesitant, of course, and he says, if you don't come, I'll kill your baby. It won't take long. Now she thinks that he wants to rape her. Okay, and Tsotsi says, no, it's not that. It won't take long. Okay, he gets angry only when they reach the door to his room. So she follows him to Tsotsi's room. Did he turn and point so that she went in first? Okay. She sees the baby and he says, feed it. Now, it was worse than what she had first thought he wanted. Okay. What she first thought was he wanted to rape her. In her mind, that would have been better than feeding this baby. Because she looks at the baby, she sees the baby is filthy. Okay. And it's like a foreign baby. It's an invasion, a violation of her body. He's too dirty, she says. So then he says, well, clean him. Clean him and feed him. When she still hesitated, he took out his knife, okay, again, going to violence, gave her one last chance. Now he said, now I'll go back for yours and kill your baby. Miriam fought down her disgust and went to work. And she cleans him, and then she's not so repulsed anymore. And so she feeds the baby, and the baby, talks about how her breast was dry at first or whatever. But apparently for half an hour, which is a flipping long time, Miriam takes the baby away from her second breast with a feeling of tremendous physical fatigue. He has had enough, she said. The baby was obviously starving, lacking those nutrients, so really took in as much as he could, no doubt overfed. And she asks Tsotsi, well, where's his mother? And Tsotsi shrugs his shoulders and says he doesn't really care. He doesn't say anything, actually. He's just not interested in answering or trying to make conversation with her now, because he's used her and he's done with her. She opens the door and closes it behind her and walks home, and this is after she said that a bitch in her backyard would look after its puppies better. And he says no, and she thinks he says go, and so she leaves. But he doesn't care because, well, she's fed the baby, and that's that. I suppose we should take note that it could have been worse. He could have raped her first or afterwards. He could have killed her baby. He could have killed her, I suppose. She could go out and tell people what happened, and he doesn't seem too bothered. So there's still a bit of a change happening there. Then on the page 103 at the bottom, it just talks about how lazy people are, etc., etc. And then we end the chapter off where it says here that Tsotsi's just sitting there in the room with the baby, okay? And it's getting nighttime now. The baby had cried once and he had carried it until it stopped. He had carried it until it stopped. Okay, that's quite maternal, looking after the baby. Gentle. Then put it back on the bed and gone to his seat in the corner of his room. He had no desire for movement. So he kept quiet and sat in the dark and remembered it again. Remembered it again. We don't know what it is at this point. It's a memory. From beginning to end, he remembered it again and again, pausing only in the deep silence between each reliving to wonder how he had ever forgotten. In other words, he remembers this memory and he thinks to himself, how could I ever have forgotten this? At this point, we don't know what the memory is, but chapter 9 is in fact the memory, when he's a 10-year-old boy sitting on the floor playing with cotton reels and stuff like that, and he's got his mother and his grandmother there, etc., etc. So read that chapter if you haven't already, and watch the analysis on chapter 9 for more. Alright guys, so I hope that has helped you.